Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This webinar series, Scientific Publishing in the Digital Age, is brought to you by IES Research, a team that provides research publication with an engaging voice through the adaptation of the IES storyboard of Big Why, Why, and What. My name is Iris Xu, and I'm your host for the day. This is the third section of the series, and we're happy to have Estelle Chang from ORCID to be our speaker. Estelle is the Engagement Manager, Global Direct Members of ORCID, and she supports and engages with the ORCID community in the Asia-Pacific region and works collaboratively with partners, stakeholders, and the communities to grow adoption of ORCID and to establish communities of practice. Estelle's sharing will be 30 minutes, and we will have the remaining time for the Q&A. So please feel free to ask any questions throughout the session by simply using the Q&A option located at the bottom center of your Zoom meeting interface. And if you're joining via YouTube, you may type your questions there, and we will monitor from it as well. So we will also share the YouTube channel link on the chat box. So if anyone would like to join from there, you will have the link from the chat box. So before we actually start the section, let us know more about you. We know that this session is focusing on the academic publishers or small-scale academic publishers. However, we would like to know where you are from or which role that you are in your institute. So we're having a small poll here. I'm starting it now. So actually, you can have multiple choice if you're in a multiple role. So please use your time to let us know where you're from. So we see the number is growing, and most of you, around 40%, you are a researcher. About 20% is from the library sector. About 5% is from the publisher. But we do have about 20% who is selecting the option for others. So I'm quite interested to know that what are the others, but I think that it might be something between the researchers and the students, or even if you're an editor, probably you will choose others. But anyway, I think that would give us a better picture of who you are, so that we can focus more on what we are going to communicate with others. Okay, so probably I can share the results together for you. Now, I think Estelle, we know more about the audience, and that should give you a better picture of who the audience come from. So anyway, without further ado, so let me move the ground to Estelle to begin the session. Estelle, all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Iris. So hello, everyone. This is Estelle Chen from ORCID. So I want to begin by thanking you, IES, for inviting me to speak here and to engage with you. So I am going to start sharing my presentation and turn off my camera for better connections. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. Yes, perfect. All right, just let me start the sharing today. So hello, everyone. So yeah, it's a very great chance to speak here to share a bit more about scholarly publishing and research infrastructure, connecting with ORCID to maximize impact and interoperability. And I anticipate that everyone here after the session you could understand what ORCID is and how it can benefit researchers, and recognize how and why organizations adopt ORCID in a research workflow. And the most importantly, you take actions to connect ORCID IDs with other researcher identifiers and organizations IDs or organizations during your research workflow. All right, so next slide. I'm frozen, so please wait a moment. Let me, it's frozen. Apologize for the technical issues. All right, just let me use it again. Okay, here you go. Yeah, so I just want to briefly start by ORCID's vision. So ORCID's vision is a world where all who participate in research, scholarship, and innovation are uniquely identified and connected to their contributions and affiliations across time, disciplines, and borders. And this is the ORCID team. So now we have 36 people across 60 countries speaking 50 languages, and this is the ORCID engagement team. And a closer look at my team. So in addition to myself, I have another 2 colleagues, Brian Minihan, who is based in Hong Kong, and another is Anna Cardoso, who is based in Mexico. And we are responsible for engaging the global direct ORCID members and of course partners. So ORCID is a community-driven organization. So we've heard the research community wants researchers are accurately credited for their contributions, and the researchers can easily share information about their contributions or affiliations. And organizations, no matter you are publisher or you are research institutes or you are funding organizations, anyway, for those organizations, they can easily acquire and share research information, and they want to be accurately cited as well. And the research community really wants accurate search and discovery tools available. So to make this vision come true, open research infrastructure is needed for researchers to share information on global scale, and also for organizations in the research ecosystem to share and retrieve information on global scale. But how? So here comes to the value of identifiers. So persistent identifiers for people like ORCID, for places like ROR, or for things like DOI are fundamental in anchoring and reference information in a trusted and interoperable way, because PIDs, persistent identifiers that disambiguate information and support linking. So in the next few slides, I'm going to share a bit more about the notion of open research infrastructure and how persistent identifiers support a trustworthy research infrastructure. So in the next few slides, I'm going to use analogy to describe what open infrastructure like. So we can think of open infrastructure as if we are going to the grocery store, and here are researchers standing in line, each with their basket of information to share. And, okay, once again, it's frozen. Apologize. So, a moment, please. It's not moving. Okay. Let me stop sharing. Just try to see if it is possible. Okay. Okay, here I am. Just let me try again. Okay, great. Yeah, continuing. So yes, if we are going to the grocery store and we have a basket and we have information we want to share. And each basket has a diverse group of objects, each with its own set of identifiers for the object, as like a bottle of juice, and the relating organizations like company. So in the research world, the object could be a research data set or a paper with the identifier of a DOI, and the organization could be the researcher worked at or the research facilities where they capture the data with organizational IDs. And the researchers use their unique ORCID ID to connect objects to their professional activities account, like their research management system account or like their manuscript submission account. And how the objects, how the research outputs are connected with the person, that is through organizations adopt ORCID in a workflow. And ORCID is a nonprofit membership and platform-neutral organization. We are sustained by members from publishers, funders in research institutes, and others. ORCID is governed by representatives from a board, which is elected from our members. And over 10 million researchers now have registered for an ID, and over 1,000 member organizations in 53 countries, including 23 consortia. And there are more than 600 research systems using ORCID. And I'm going to use 3 points to illustrate the features of ORCID. So ORCID is a global, unique, and open identifier for researchers and for people who contribute to research. And ORCID is a persistent identifier. So no matter changes your name, career, location, discipline, your ORCID ID stays the same. And ORCID provides a set of standard procedures, what called APIs, for connecting researchers to their affiliations and activities. So what does it mean exactly? It means ORCID members. When we speak of ORCID members, it always refers to organizations. So ORCID membership is for organizations. ORCID members can use ORCID API to invite researchers to share ORCID IDs by a process called OAuth authentication. And ORCID members can collect information from ORCID and connect research activities to researchers' ORCID records. So taking the screenshot as an example, so DataCite is an ORCID member organizations. So DataCite can use ORCID's API to invite the researcher Sheila to share her ORCID ID via the OAuth process, which you see now. And DataCite then have the user's permission to collect information from from Sheila's ORCID records, and also add or update research information to Sheila's ORCID account. So by clicking the button Authorize, DataCite becomes a trusted organization. It means those organizations will have permission to help researchers to update their ORCID records. And of course, those organizations come from a variety of different identities, from service providers, data repositories, publishers, grant funders, etc. And this is the screenshot by University of Virginia. They connect information back to the researcher's ORCID account. And ORCID is a place to store and share those resulting connections between IDs and research activities and affiliations. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to share some examples of those different connections. So the first we see here is actually coming from a New Zealand member called Royal Society. So they connect employment information back to the researcher's ORCID account. And also the connection can be made for funding. So Chang'an University in Taiwan, they connect grants to the researcher's ORCID account. And okay, you can also connect different identifiers, different researcher identifiers to the researcher's ORCID account or record. And this is the example from Japan. It's researcher name reservoir ID, the Japanese, the national researcher ID in Japan. And as you can see, you can also connect your ORCID ID with different researcher identifiers like Scopus author ID or researcher ID, now public ones. And also you can connect works. So this is the example from Yonsei University in Korea. They connect researchers' works to researchers' ORCID account. And this is the example from China, the Chinese Agriculture Academy Sciences. They connect a professional profile, they build an in-house profile called e-scientist. They connect those profiles to the researcher's ORCID account. And this is more related to do with the publishing workflow, so peer review. So you can connect peer review. If you are a publisher, you can connect peer reviews to the researcher's ORCID account. This is an example from OAE Publishing. All right, so I want to use the diagram here to illustrate interoperability. So we were seeing quite some examples of different connections, and connections are based on interoperability. And with interoperability is most importantly, to build those connections. So all this starts from researchers having an ORCID account first, and those different organizations in the research workflow, they can use ORCID to collect information about the researchers through ORCID registry, and also to connect valid information to the researcher's ORCID account. For instance, so once a researcher has an ORCID ID, he or she can share the ORCID ID with the publisher during the manuscript submission process. And then the publisher can connect validated information like peer review to the researcher's ORCID account. Meanwhile, the publisher can also collect important information like employment information pushed by research institutes to the ORCID records, and publisher can further collect such information back to the publishing system for further use. And from the research institute's perspective, they can also collect publication information pushed by the publisher, the source, to their system for further use. And all the information can circulate around without difficulty, even though those organizations may adopt different system platform for their own use. But with the support of ORCID or such mechanism, interoperability is there. And as I shared, connection maximize impact interoperability. So through linkages with other systems, ORCID improves discoverability and reduces repetitive data entry. So in the research ecosystem or in the research workflow, there are several different kinds of elements like author, institution, publication. And in different workflow, especially in evaluation workflow, we want to discover more about how those relationships are connected with each other. So in the later part of my presentation, I'm going to use two use cases to illustrate the practical usage or adoption of ORCID. So the first use case is ORCID in publishing. I'm going to chat about open journal system in particular and a use case through DOI providers. So globally, more and more publishers and repositories start to use DOIs or ISBNs to identify journals, datasets, and books. And as of now, at least over 7,000 publisher and journal systems collect ORCID IDs during the submission process, and many are also using ORCID for peer reviews. And I think as everyone here, probably you are aware of, there are a variety of different publishing systems support ORCID features, but may vary among those different systems. And I'm going to introduce OJS in particular. is because OJS now is an ORCID certified system. So last June, ORCID launched a program called ORCID Service Provider Program. This program is one to certify those service providers, those platform providers that follows ORCID's best practices. So an ORCID service provider is any organization that provides a product, free or paid, that includes functionality that can authenticate ORCID IDs, meaning they can invite researchers to share ORCID IDs and update ORCID records, add information back to ORCID records. And there are several other systems that support ORCID, but haven't met the best practice like eJournal Press or Scholar One. And ORCID and OJS. So just a bit more background information about the OJS. It's an open source software for managing and publishing scholarly journals. It's originally developed and released by the Public Knowledge Project in 2001 to improve access. And I think the headquarters is in Canada. So there is a plugin for OJS to enable ORCID features. So using that plugin, so the publishers can request ORCID upon submission and request that contributing authors also to provide their ORCID IDs in addition to just corresponding authors. And with that plugin, the publisher can update all authors' ORCID records with information they want to share. So from the perspective of editors, so for those publishers using OJS as a publication system or a manuscript system, so editors can request ORCID IDs and update permissions from authors and co-authors during production by sending just an email from the submission. So you can see this is the screenshot, and editors can invite also co-authors to authenticate or to share their ORCID IDs with OJS, with the publisher, to enable further workflow. And from the publisher themselves, so for those publishers adopt OJS, those publishers can connect works directly to the author's ORCID record. And in other words, those works or those publications are asserted by publishers, as you can see the screenshot here. So you can directly push publication information to ORCID's records, and the source name will be Open Journal System, the publisher. And in these slides, I'm going to talk more about the feature called Auto Update. So this is really the collaboration of different persist identifiers to make researchers' life easier and also to demonstrate the value of persistent identifiers. So how this happen? Again, begins from researchers. So researchers connect ORCID IDs during manuscript submission process, or they connect ORCID IDs during data depository process when deposit data set to some data centers. And those publishers or data centers, they embed ORCID IDs as a part of the metadata when deposit for DOIs. And those DOI registration agency, now there are 3 DOI registration agencies support this. That is Crossref, Dataset, and Japan Link Center in Japan. Those DOI RAs, registration agencies, they will check metadata and they will notice, oh, here are the ORCID IDs. So when assigning DOIs to those works that they received from publishers or those data sets received from data centers, they can push those publication or data set information to the researchers' ORCID records. And by doing that, it enables researchers to spend more time doing research rather than managing their ORCID records. And also it directly preserves metadata quality because all the information directly flows from the publisher or data center themselves. And it supports transparency and trust in research information because we know who is doing what, and the machine did the work. The second use case I'm going to share is about, I think in the past few slides, we were seeing some adoption about ORCID in publication. So from here, I'm going to share a bit more about how ORCID links research from submission, publication to evaluation, and it indeed improved data quality. So globally, research institutes also adopt ORCID. It's because ORCID saves reporting time for researchers, and it improves ability to evaluate research outcomes better. And more than 700 research institutes are ORCID members, and they integrate ORCID into their research or reporting workflows. So they also adopt some organizational IDs to expose use and curation of their research collections or research outputs. And in many countries, those efforts are being coordinated on a national scale through ORCID consortia. So evaluation is indeed a very delicate and complicated process. So however, there are certain important principles or practices when it comes to the real process, or when it comes to how to conduct evaluation. So there are 4 dimensions are listed here, like what is the scholarly record of this researcher, or what research results were published and ongoing with the funding, and what are the research outputs of organizations last year, and how to ensure the data is valid for metrics. Especially, I think from universities' perspective, evaluation, especially about researcher and research outputs, are quite a crucial component in today's world. So yeah, so here is a diagram I prepared for illustrate the information flow in terms of a bit like evaluation. So again, all start from researchers, and this is the researcher's ORCID ID and ORCID record. And you can see there's the employment information, and ideally the employee information shall be added by the university system directly, as we saw in the past few slides. There are quite examples that the research institutes can help researchers by directly adding information to their ORCID accounts, and this is the employment information. And those employment information can be further flowed to the publisher submission system. And with the publication available, or the information of official publication available, those will flow to quite some indexes databases like Scopus or PubMed. And of course, those metrics or those indexes, the data there are a crucial part, or at least some parts of the what we call data rankings nowadays. And also want to point out that those indexes databases, now they also work with ORCID, and they will use ORCID's data or those data in the ORCID records as a part to supplement their index databases. And this is basically the workflow from submission to publication and to evaluation. So my point is, I just want to also to illustrate that ORCID ID should be really a part of your research workflow. And it's not something just want to fulfill certain regulations. I know nowadays more and more publishers are requiring ORCID IDs, but I think the underlying principle should be it support your research life. And this is another example from ORCID member University of Cambridge. So they use ORCID, they adopt ORCID into their 2 systems. The one is called symplectic elements. So this is a research management system. So they adopt symplectic elements to integrate with ORCID. So they collect ORCID IDs and link those IDs to researchers in symplectic elements. And they have a second system called Apollo, which is a repository system based on DSpace. And those ORCID IDs collected from symplectic elements will flow to Apollo. And the Apollo is a tool to a repository tool to try to capture different resources and different data. And then those data will be sent to DataCite for DOIs following the workflow we just shared. So from Apollo, the registration of those data sets with DataCite DOIs will take place there. And based on the feature we just shared, auto update. So DataCite will automatically, based on ORCID ID and DOI, to update those information back to the researcher's ORCID records. So this is the vivid example about how to adopt ORCID in the research workflow, and especially from a research institute's perspective. So here is a diagram. I want to illustrate or stress again that interoperability is there, but I will say it's even more important to leverage the interoperability about connecting them. Connections maximize impact and interoperability from outputs, publications, and the data, and from people, individuals, or different researchers to funding. And to recap, so if you are a researcher today, or if you are even a PhD student today in this webinar, so how can you start? So the foremost is to register an ORCID ID, and after registering for an ORCID ID, you need to use that. You can use ORCID during your manuscript submission process, and you can connect your ORCID IDs with other researcher identifiers, like your Scopus ID or your researcher ID. And you should also add information to ORCID records to make it just more than an ID, but an ID with information. And from institutions' perspective, I want to highlight some of the values that we receive from the community. It's about time saving and reduce errors because we have a more automated information sharing and a cross-system interoperability function. And you can manage your organization's name and your researchers' connection. And then you can maintain links with your researchers. If your researchers change their careers or they move to another institute, you can still have the ORCID ID to help you to understand. And also from the researchers, it improves recognition and discoverability of their research. As I mentioned several times, researchers now can have more time doing research, less time managing those. And researcher can control and manage a trustworthy and easy way to offer their ORCID records. And for researchers, it's for free. So thank you for your support and your attention. So I think we are able to start to answer questions you may have now. And I think the slides will be available. So I will invite Aris to share the slides with participants here today. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Estelle, for the informative sharing. So for anyone who is requesting the slide, sure, we will share the slide, and we will also share the recording of the session so you can go back and watch it whenever you like it. So we welcome any questions, and we already see some questions coming in from the Q&A toolbar, and you're welcome to type in your questions in the Q&A section. And for those who join from the YouTube channel, you can also type in your question there, and we will monitor. So because right in this before the session starts, we understand that there are quite a few participants who are actually joining in the session as the individual researcher or students. So I already see some questions coming in. But before we ask those questions to Estelle, I would please allow me to ask some questions for our publishers attendees. I hope that is okay with all of you. So Estelle, you shared the value of ORCID for the individual researchers as well as the universities in your previous slide. But I'm quite curious about what is the value and what is the benefit for the publishers to join in the ORCID. Would you like to elaborate more on that point?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Shall I turn on my camera? Or probably not, just for better connections. Okay, let me, I decided not to turn it on because I think, yeah, anyway. Yeah, I think, so yeah, back to Iris' question, from publishers or research institutes perspective, why they want to join ORCID, right? I think there are different, I can answer it following just different points. I think for research institutes, it's quite clear that they want to help their researchers. I think also about publishers, because when you are in the publishing world, you always, it's very important to give credits to your authors and to give credits for your reviewers and to ensure that their contributions and their authorship is there and can be recognized. I think that's the most compelling reasons for publishers to work with ORCID. And also, I can say that because when ORCID was born back in 2012, officially, at that time, the earliest community embraced ORCID is actually from publishing community. So I think it's a great standard from there, so like a best practice. So from that time, publishing community, they recognize they need this kind of ideas to resolve problems they may encounter during the publishing workflow, like I just mentioned. And for research institutes, yeah, I just answered about publishers. Hope that clarifies. And for research institutes, the most compelling reason is they want a better mechanism to collect and to connect research information, I will say. So they want to collect information from ORCID and also trying to connect information back to ORCID and to ensure those research outputs are uniquely connected with the right researchers.
Right. So you also mentioned the connectivity or interoperability between ORCID and OJS as one example. And I know that ORCID also connect with other service providers such as Pure, Elements, or institutional repositories, for example. So in your opinion, Estelle, these connections between different platforms, how can it benefit for the ORCID adopters as well as, of course, for the researchers who already adopt ORCID, but for the publishers who are adopting or who are interested in adopting ORCID ID into their workflow, how does these connection between different platforms will benefit them? Can it increase their, let's say, traffic to their website, or could could it enhance the, let's say, validation of the author's information, for example?
Yeah, thank you, Iris. I think those are really good questions, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. So I think, yeah, that's very important. I think those, the connectivity among those different platforms, like ORCID connects with service providers, and ORCID connects with publishers, and even like ORCID connects with funders. As my slides as my slides indicate, I think the fundamental or the underlying principle is that all of those organizations in the research workflow, they can benefit from having better data quality and having a more transparent way and a more friendly way to collect information. So I think previously, from the publishing perspective, previously it's if you are going to submit, actually you need to as a researcher, you need to fill in quite some information because you need to register for that account. And I think from the publisher's perspective, if they can have a more easier way and a more transparent way to help their authors to kind of reduce the burden to fill in those, and also to help them to have better data to serve as the author's information, that could be like one of the benefits for them. And as you just also circulating back to your point about metric stuff, I think ORCID is not in a position to play around or to influence the metrics. So I think everyone works at ORCID, we will never say, okay, join us, you will boost your impact factor. I think that's not true, and that's not a very accurate description. So, but I think what a more accurate description is that if you are start to use the ORCID and to try to benefit from those connectivity, it can help data quality. And with better data quality, of course, you can have more potential for growth, like for promoting your own impact factor or your own visibility. I think that's a better and more accurate description.
Yeah, I agree with that, because only using ORCID ID is I would say incomplete if for these connectivity between different platforms, because the ORCID ID is more towards the author information, while from the publisher's point of view, it doesn't, it will be better positioned if ORCID can combine or can work together with other persistent ID like DOI, for example, so that the information exchange between different servers can be more complete, and make sure that the readers or users who see interest from the author, for example, or from the article list under this author can link back to the article itself. I hope my understanding is correct.
Yeah, I think it's all about connecting, right? Making the right connections and how to, you uniquely identified and improves data quality, as just you exemplified that parts. So yeah, great, thanks.
Right. Actually, one of our audience is asking about DataCite. So DataCite is basically, it is independent from the DOI service of Crossref. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, so there are actually, as far as I know, now there are 10 DOI registration agencies around the world. And DOI, so previously I actually worked at the DOI community. So yeah, so DataCite is so both DataCite and Crossref, they are separate DOI RAs focusing on different missions and scope. That's it. And ORCID works very closely with these two, plus some regional registration agency, like there is one in Japan, and there is one in Taiwan, and there is one in Korea.
Right. So the data set is basically the DOI. I would say part of it will be the DOI registration service for data.
Yeah, that's I think that's their main mission. One of their main missions. Yeah.
I see.
About the Crossref is more about publications. So and DataCite is really for us their organization's name is about data site. So
right.
about research data, I would say. Yeah.
Right. So I think research data is, and also that is a growing, I would say, mandatory mandatory items for the authors to submit the manuscript to be published, because research data can be something that play an important role in supplement the publication. So for the data information, it can also be registered under their ORCID registry. Is that correct?
Yeah, so speaking of that, so now at ORCID, we support, I think, 36 different work types. So when you, if you are having ORCID ID now, you can just go to your ORCID account and you can see there's a part called works, and you can actually now I think from publication like journal articles, conference proceedings, or book chapters to data set, or even to patents, or like some more abstract outputs like performance is also, those research contributions or outputs are also all supported from ORCID side. So you can connect your professional contributions in those categories to ORCID. Of course, there is also a work type called other.
Right. So one question in our Q&A chat is that, is it possible, or is it allowed to upload the the researcher's article which has co-authors? Let's say I am the one of the author. Can I add the information into my ORCID account if there are co-authors?
I think co-authors is a bit tricky. So I think my understanding is now that I need to check a little bit, to be honest, because this is also something we've been discussed, and especially our product team is deeply involved to improve the workflow of adding co-authors. So I need to check actually a little bit about our current updates. So apologies if I cannot really give the most accurate answer now, but I think you can visit our support article first to check, because it's an ongoing discussion. So I know I don't want to provide inaccurate information now. So yeah, but I think so, but probably just some restrictions. And yeah, but it's something we are improving because we will learn a lot of community feedback. We need to improve that workflow. So thanks.
Right, because to my understanding that ORCID doesn't actually, ORCID run on a, how to say, on faith. That means that if the author, the ORCID believes whatever the author uploads onto the ORCID without much, I would say, authentication. Is that still the right understanding? Or ORCID will do the evaluation after the author uploaded information? Sorry.
Oh, okay. I think, okay, I got, if I understand your description correctly, I think at ORCID, we don't verify the information submit or filled by our researchers, if that's what you are asking, because we are unable and we are not in a position to check if the information is valid or not. So that's why we work with our community. We work with organizations that can directly connect information to ORCID records to improve the data quality, right? And I also want to point out that, but in ORCID, we do have a spam kind of mechanism using some technology trying to discover spammers. Let me put it this way. But I think that's a problem that will encounter by every organizations, every internet organizations will encounter such problems, and we are doing our best to prevent such. But yeah, we don't validate the information that researchers share, if that's your question.
I see.
Yeah, because and I think we are unable to do that, right? So I don't think it's possible for any other tech companies, let me put it this way, to really validate those. So a better way, as I just circulated, I think the better way is also trying to rely on organizations, our community, to directly push or connecting information. Yeah.
So right. So that is when the interoperability come into the
Yeah.
picture, because the author or the let's say publisher and the research organization has the validated information of the publication list of that specific author. So where the data is exchanging between different platforms, these data, it can be I would say, because they're from an authorized source, so the ORCID can be trusted in that way.
Yeah, I think that's it. That's why we are always highlighting the importance of working with the community, and we highlight the importance of connecting information back to ORCID from organizations, from our members. Yeah, hope this clarifies a little bit. And
right, and we also have other questions, which is like, how can I link my ORCID ID with Google Scholar ID, for example?
that's a question I really want to shout out as well. Yeah, I think as you may know that ORCID already has been working with a lot of platforms, and of course there are still others that we are exploring. I think one of them are Google Scholar. So yeah, actually I think, as ORCID is community driven, so I hope that some days that more community voices relate to us, we can have a better position to start conversation with Google Scholar. But no, not now. You cannot really link your ORCID ID with Google Scholar in a way, in a sense like you can link with Google with Scopus ID. Not in that way. Yeah.
Oh, and another question is, I think many of our audience would have the same question, is how to link ORCID with, let's say, researchers ID or,
Scopus.
Yes, exactly.
And that's quite straightforward. I think you can visit ORCID support website, or you can visit either, Scopus website or Populos Now's website. Those two are ORCID members, and we work very closely. So it's just following the process, so you can link those IDs together. It's not really just follow the kind of guideline instruction.
Right. I think it is a very straightforward process. Simply register an ORCID ID, and in the ORCID ID managing page, you can just type in your researcher's ID or Scopus ID, and then boom, it is connected, right?
Not really like not really that way. So okay, if you want to more specific, I think as far as I remember, I think for Scopus, if you want to connect your Scopus ID with ORCID, you can start from Scopus side. So you can sign to your Scopus profile and start the process over there, or you can start the process from ORCID. So you log into your ORCID account, you go to the work section. There's a tool called Search Engine Wizard, and if you go to there, you can see a option code. I think I forgot Scopus ID or something, but you can discover that is Scopus, and from there you can link those two together. But from Populos or previously research IDs, now they only support to link your Populos with ORCID from Populos site. So you need to sign into your Populos profile and link your ORCID ID with Populos from there.
Okay, so it's more complicated than I imagined.
I won't say complicated, but it's just you need to, there are a few steps, let me put it this way. Just like step 1, 2, 3. It's not like a magic, you just click one and just automatically linked. You need to go through a little bit steps, but I won't say complicated. No.
I see.
No, I don't want to scare people away. No, not complicated. Definitely not.
Okay, so I think we also have another question.
Sure.
Which is very interesting. So the audience is asking, as a non-MPG, non-for-profit organization, I believe, how ORCID Fund is operation?
I think it's actually a very great question. So yeah, I think it's, yeah, we need to definitely, it's, yeah, as I said, ORCID is a community-driven organization. So when ORCID was founded like 8 years ago, at that time we got a funding, I think, from several institutes. But nowadays, you know, with time passing, nowadays, I think even since last year, ORCID is completely self-sustained by our members. So we are sustained by our members' membership fees. As I share in my slides, ORCID is a member-based organizations. So our fee or our operation energy comes from our membership fees. And yeah, so we don't have any more funds now, as far as I'm aware. So we are completely self-sustained. All about membership fee. That's why members are very crucial.
Right,
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
So we have some time for one last question, and I would
Okay.
like to pull the focus to our publishers' audience. So, Estelle, in your opinion, what are the main challenges for the publishers to adopt ORCID ID in your experience?
Okay, thank you. I just unmute. I just mute. No, I'm speaking now. No worries. Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I think from our experiences globally, most publishers are quite eager to work with ORCID. So there are several challenges. So I think the first may be actually membership fee. I think that's very transparent, right? But I also want to point out that ORCID actually encourages smaller organizations work with us. So if you are a startup, that means your annual revenue, if you are commercial, or if your annual funding, if you are non-commercial, less than 20 something, I need to check, is actually just less than a certain amount, and you will be eligible to enjoying a startup membership fee. It will be around 1,000 USD per year. I think it's quite okay for smaller organizations. So that's the first challenge about membership fee, but glad that we have some flexibility about that. And the second is actually about the technical component. So I think I've heard that, as I said, that now more and more publishing systems are start to supporting ORCID. So that's great, because it means that more and more publishers can work with ORCID without worrying, you know, the technical components. But if you are using a in-house application, like you develop your own submission system, that's fine, because we do have some cases that publishers just use their own system, and it's we will help you for your integration, adoption for ORCID. So that's the second challenge. Yeah, I think from publishers' perspective, those two are probably the most common challenges I've heard. One is about technical capability, the other is about membership fee. And I just go back to our documentation. Yeah, so organizations with less than USD 20,000, or not 200,000, sorry, 200,000 in revenue or in funding, you are eligible for startup discount. It will be 1,000 something USD per year.
Right. I think most, in my understanding, many publishers in Asian Pacific, they are quite small scale, and the content is basically open access, so probably lesser revenue than the Western publishers. So yeah, thank you for clarifying the membership fee issue. So I think that will give them a better picture of applying ORCID into their publishing process.
Yeah, and I just also want to add, if you are interested in ORCID, no matter you are an individual researcher, a student, or you are a delegate from publishers or research institutes, you are welcome to visit ORCID's website. We do have quite some information. And if you do have questions, I think contact ORCID support is the easiest way to find answers.
Right. So
Yeah.
thank you very much, Estelle, for the wonderful
Thank you.
sharing. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
so, in fact, we still, our following section, not right next to it, but we will have another following section. So it will be focusing on analytics.
Yeah.
So while infrastructure have been built and we start to engage with audience, how to set up the strategy to bring the audience closer and evaluate the outcome properly is the focus of our next webinar to come. So it will be on the 28th of April, and we will share information to you guys later. So until we see you next time, stay safe and have the rest of your day enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ice. Thank you, Iris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice day.